sister-in-law slipped something into my tea, but I got a change to switch. The truth is then revealed. I always knew my husband's monthly family brunches would be the death of me. I just didn't expect it to be quite so literal. The morning had started like any other Sunday at the Montgomery household with Estella, my sister-in-law, monopolizing the kitchen while pretending I didn't exist. She floated around the granite countertops in her designer sundress, arranging pastries on my wedding china with the precision of a bomb technician, occasionally throwing glances my way that could curdle milk. "Leona," she sang, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Would you be a dear and just sit somewhere you're hovering is making me nervous." In my own kitchen, where I paid the mortgage, I forced a smile. "Just making sure you can find everything, Estella." "Oh, I know where everything is," she replied with peculiar emphasis, sharing a quick glance with my husband Corey that made my skin prickle. Corey Montgomery, my husband of 5 years, stood nearby arranging teacups with the anxious energy of a squirrel crossing a highway. At 38, he still carried himself with the same nervous hesitation that I once found endearing. Today, however, he was practically vibrating with tension, his eyes darting between his sister and me like he was watching a tennis match played with hand grenades. We met at a charity auction 6 years ago. I was there representing Mercer & Stone, bidding on artwork to decorate our newly renovated offices. Corey was hiding behind a potted plant, desperately trying to avoid small talk with potential clients. There was something endearing about his social awkwardness, then a refreshing change from the aggressive confidence I dealt with daily in the corporate world. He'd approached me at the bar, spilling half his drink down his shirt in the process. "I'm usually more coordinated," he'd said, dabbing ineffectually at the stain. "Well, no, that's a lie. This is actually my best performance at a social event to date." I'd laughed, charmed by his self-deprecating humor and the way he blushed when I offered my number. What I didn't realize then was that his awkwardness wasn't temporary social anxiety, it was his permanent state of being. "Tea's almost ready," he announced now, his voice cracking slightly as he carefully measured loose leaves into the pot. "Using that special blend you brought from London, Stell." Another meaningful glance between siblings. I wasn't being paranoid. I'd spent 10 years as senior account executive at Mercer & Stone, negotiating with sharks in designer suits who'd sooner eat their young than lose a client. I knew when something wasn't right, and something definitely wasn't right with this tea. Their father, Reginald Montgomery, patriarch and perpetual disapprover of everything I did, arrived precisely at 11. He barely acknowledged me before launching into his weekly sermon on the good old days when men were providers and women didn't need careers to feel fulfilled. This from a man whose company I'd saved from bankruptcy last year through a miraculous client acquisition, a fact conveniently forgotten whenever Corey's overshadowed ego needed stroking. Reginald Montgomery had built a modest insurance firm in the 1980s, riding the economic boom until his outdated business practices caught up with him in the 2010s. When his biggest client threatened to leave, it was my connections, not Corey's, that salvaged the relationship. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights putting together a presentation that convinced them to stay, saving Montgomery Insurance from certain collapse. Reginald had thanked me with a stiff nod and a begrudging, "Not bad for a woman's perspective," as if my MBA and decade of experience were adorable hobbies rather than professional qualifications. "How's business, son?" Reginald asked, pointedly ignoring my existence. Corey straightened his spine, a rare display of something almost resembling confidence. "Actually, Dad, I've been working on something big, really big. Should be closing the deal this week." "What deal?" I asked, genuinely curious since Corey's investment consulting business had been circling the drain for months. His smile tightened. "You know I don't like discussing business before it's finalized, honey. Jinxes the whole thing. Convenient, considering his last 3 big deals had materialized into exactly nothing." Last month's guaranteed client turned out to be a college friend looking for free financial advice. The month before that, his major investor meeting was actually a timeshare presentation he'd attended for the free hotel stay. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly climbing the corporate ladder at Mercer & Stone, managing accounts worth 8 figures while Corey struggled to maintain his one-man consulting firm. I never flaunted my success, in fact. I went out of my way to highlight Corey's strengths when his father was around. But there was no hiding the fact that my name appeared in the business journal while Corey's business cards gathered dust in his desk drawer. Enough shop talk, Estella interrupted, placing the teapot on the table with ceremonial precision. Let's enjoy this beautiful brunch. Estella Montgomery Pierce, 35 and twice divorced, had made a career out of being a Montgomery, where I had degrees and professional accomplishments. Estella had her father's last name and a trust fund. She'd never held a job for more than 6 months, preferring instead to consult for family friends who were too afraid of Reginald to refuse her services. She'd disliked me from our first meeting, when I'd corrected her about a basic financial term during dinner conversation. Actually, Estella, a bear market doesn't mean people are selling animal pelts on Wall Street. The table had laughed. She'd never forgiven me. As she poured tea into china cups, I noticed something peculiar. While serving her father and herself, she poured directly from the pot. But for my cup, Corey intercepted, insisting on adding the perfect amount of milk and sugar himself, a courtesy he'd never once extended in 5 years of marriage. Just how you like it, he said, sliding the cup toward me with the overly bright smile of someone trying to sell oceanfront property in Nebraska. Thank you, dear, I replied, watching as relief visibly washed over him. So thoughtful. 10 years in corporate America had taught me never to show my hand too early. So I pretended to sip the tea, pressing the cup to my closed lips while observing the subtle exchange of satisfied nods between my husband and his sister. The conversation meandered through family gossip and thinly veiled criticisms of my career. But my mind was racing. Tomorrow was the biggest pitch of my career, presenting to Kelwin Industries, a $300 million client that would secure my partnership at the firm. I'd mentioned it exactly once at dinner last week, and Corey had responded with all the enthusiasm of someone hearing about a sale on dental floss. That's nice, honey, he'd said without looking up from his phone. Speaking of work, did I tell you about the potential investor I met at the gym? Yet now I caught him checking his watch every few minutes, his leg bouncing under the table with nervous energy. How's the tea, Leona? Estella asked, her eyes fixed on my cup. It's a special blend, should really relax you. Delicious, I lied, setting it down, though I think I'll let it cool a bit more. But it's best when it's hot, Corey insisted, his voice unnaturally tight. The flavor profile changes. Since when did my husband, who couldn't distinguish between Cabernet and ketchup, care about flavor profiles? This was the man who once described a $200 bottle of wine as grape-forward with hints of more grape. Speaking of hot, I segued smoothly. I left my special honey in the kitchen. It would be perfect with this. I stood before anyone could object and disappeared into the kitchen, my mind working overtime. Quickly, I checked the tea canister Estella had brought, sniffing it carefully, a strange medicinal undertone mixed with the bergamot not normal for Earl Grey. I took a paper towel and carefully collected a sample, sealing it in a small Ziploc bag from the drawer. When I returned, I carried a small honey pot and an identical teacup. Sorry for the delay. I smiled, setting the honey down. I got a call from work. Just a quick question about tomorrow's presentation. Always working, Reginald grumbled. No wonder my son looks so tired all the time. Well, someone has to, I replied with a sweet smile, enjoying the way his face reddened. Mortgages don't pay themselves. Reginald's eyes narrowed. In my day. Dad, Corey interrupted, his voice uncomfortably high. Have you tried these scones? Estella made them from scratch. I noticed my original cup had been moved closer to me, as if someone had been checking if I'd actually drunk from it. Oh, I think I'll have a fresh cup, I said casually. This one's gone cold. Before Estella could intervene, I reached for the teapot. Allow me to serve everyone fresh tea. Actually, it's such a special blend, after all. With deliberate movements, I poured fresh tea for everyone, making a show of arranging the cups, using a sleight of hand technique I'd learned from my magician uncle, a skill that had proven surprisingly useful in corporate negotiations. I switched Estella's fresh cup with my original doctored one. A toast, I proposed, lifting my cup, to family. We all raised our cups. I pretended to sip while watching Estella take a generous gulp from what had been meant for me. The effect was almost immediate. Her eyes widened slightly, and she placed her cup down with a shaky hand. Are you all right, Stell? Corey asked, concern etching his features. Fine, she said, voice slightly slurred. Just a little warm in here. It is rather stuffy, I agreed innocently. Though that could be the accumulated hot air from your father's opinions. Reginald spluttered into his napkin while Corey looked at me in horror. Leona, he hissed, not appropriate. Neither is drugging your wife. I thought but didn't say. Not yet. As brunch progressed, Estella grew increasingly disoriented. Her speech slowed, she missed parts of the conversation, and twice she nearly knocked over her water glass. Reginald attributed it to a late night, while Corey grew increasingly panicked, throwing confused glances between his sister and me. Maybe some fresh air would help, I suggested innocently. Estella, let's step onto the patio. Corey jumped up. I'll come too. No need, I said firmly. Just us girls, sister bonding time. But he began, his voice pitched high with anxiety. It's fine, Corey, I said with a meaningful look. I'll take good care of Estella, just like you both were planning to take care of me. His face went slack with horror as I guided his wobbly sister to the patio, shutting the door firmly behind us. Once outside, I maneuvered an unsteady Estella to the patio chairs and casually took out my phone, setting it on the table between us with the voice recorder running. You're not looking well, Estella, I observed. Maybe it was something in the tea. She blinked slowly, her inhibitions clearly lowered. Wasn't supposed to be me, she mumbled. I'm sorry. It was for you. Her words were slurring but clear enough for the recorder. Just needed you. Out of commission. Big presentation tomorrow. My suspicions confirmed. I kept my voice level. So you put something in my tea to sabotage my presentation. She nodded, then seemed to catch herself, eyes widening with delayed alarm. Corey said, if you messed up the Kelwyn pitch, they'd fire you. A sloppy smile spread across her face. Then you'd see. You'd see he's the successful one, not you. And what exactly was in the tea? Estella. Just something to make you sleep, maybe. Forget things. Corey got it from a client. Her head lolled slightly. Been doing it for weeks, little bit each time. Today was bigger dose. My blood ran cold. Weeks, this wasn't a one-time sabotage attempt. They'd been drugging me gradually. Why, I kept my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. You make him feel small, she mumbled. He's the man, should be the provider, not you, Dad says. Dad says what? A Montgomery man shouldn't be outshone by his wife. Her eyes drifted closed momentarily before she snapped them open. I don't feel right. Feel. That's because you drank what was meant for me, I said coldly, picking up my phone and stopping the recording. Quite a bit stronger than usual, wasn't it? Comprehension dawned slowly on her face that you switched the cups. I did, and now I have you on record admitting to drugging me multiple times. The sliding door opened, and Corey stepped out, his face a mask of concern that turned to horror when he saw my phone in hand and his sister's conditions. What's happening? He asked, voice thin with panic. What's happening is that I just recorded your sister confessing to your little poisoning scheme, I answered. Standing up, apparently you've been drugging me for weeks to undermine my career. Today's dose was meant to ensure I'd botch the Kelwyn pitch tomorrow. Corey's face went through a remarkable transformation shock. Guilt, and then Most tellingly, a pathetic attempt at indignation. That's absurd, he stammered. Estella's clearly unwell. She doesn't know what she's saying. Shall we call the police and have the tea tested? I challenged. Or my blood. For that matter, I wonder what toxicology will find from all your previous attempts. His face crumpled, and in that moment, I saw what I had married not a partner, but a coward who'd rather poison his wife than address his own inadequacies. Leona, please, he begged, his voice dropping to a whisper. It wasn't we didn't want to hurt you, just slow you down a little. By drugging me without my knowledge or consent, my voice was ice. That's assault, Corey, possibly attempted murder, depending on what you've been using. No, God, no, it's just a sedative. Makes concentration difficult, memory foggy. He swallowed hard. You've been so successful, and I've been struggling, and Dad keeps comparing us. So instead of working harder or, I don't know, talking to me, you decided poisoning me was the answer. I was almost impressed by the depth of his cowardice. It wasn't poison, he insisted, as if that made it better, and it wasn't my idea, Estella suggested. Oh, of course, I cut him off. Blame your sister now. Very manly, Corey. She said it would help, he protested, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Just to get you through this rough patch, just until I landed a big client, then everything would be even again. Even, I repeated incredulously. You think poisoning me makes us even? Not poisoning, he insisted. It's just medication from a doctor. A doctor prescribed medication for me without examining me. Which doctor? Corey. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, not exactly. A client of mine works in pharmaceuticals. So you illegally obtained prescription medication to drug your wife without her knowledge or consent. I clarified. That's at least 3 felonies by my count. Estella had slumped further in her chair, mumbling incoherently. Whatever they'd put in the tea, it was strong enough to significantly impair her cognitive function, and they had intended this for me before my career-defining presentation. I'm calling an ambulance, I said. Dialing 911. Your sister needs medical attention, and when they ask what happened, I'll be telling them exactly what she consumed and why. Leona, wait, Corey grabbed for my phone, but I stepped back. Think about what this will do to our family. You should have thought about that before you started drugging your wife. I replied coldly as the operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance at 487 Larchmont Drive, I stated calmly. My sister-in-law has consumed a sedative without her knowledge. She's conscious but heavily impaired. Ma'am, can you stay on the line until emergency services arrive? Of course, I agreed, watching as Corey's face turned ashen. Leona, he pleaded, we can work this out, as a family. I covered the phone. We stopped being family the moment you decided to poison me. Reginald peered at the door, his expression shifting from irritation to alarm as he took in Estella's condition. What the devil is going on out here, he demanded. Your children decided to drug me, I informed him calmly. Unfortunately for them, I switched the cups, and Estella got the dose instead. That's preposterous, Reginald blustered. My son would never— Dad, Corey interrupted, his voice small. It's true, but it wasn't supposed to hurt her, just help balance things. Reginald stared at his son, comprehension slowly dawning. Balance, you mean with her career? Corey nodded miserably. You idiot, Reginald hissed. You absolute moron. Do you have any idea what kind of legal trouble this could cause? The scandal, the headlines. I noticed his concern wasn't for my well-being or even Estella's, but for the family reputation. Typical. 30 minutes later, paramedics were loading a barely conscious Estella into an ambulance while 2 police officers took my statement in the living room. Reginald Montgomery sat ashen-faced on the sofa, oscillating between disbelief and desperate attempts to minimize what had happened. There must be some misunderstanding, he kept saying. My children would never. I played the recording for the officers. Their expressions hardened as they heard Estella's slurred confession. "We'll need that recording for evidence, ma'am," one officer said, "and we'll be testing the contents of the teacup and pot." Of course, I agreed, sending them the audio file. I also collected a sample from the tea canister when I first became suspicious. I handed over the Ziploc bag, and I believe you'll want to test my blood for evidence of previous incidents. According to my sister-in-law, this has been going on for weeks. "This is all a misunderstanding," Corey insisted, his voice rising to a desperate pitch. "It was just a joke that got out of hand, tell them." "Dad," Reginald looked like he'd aged a decade in the last hour. "Son, what have you done?" "Nothing," Corey yelped, his voice breaking. "I mean nothing serious. It was just to help Leona relax. She's been so stressed lately." The officers exchanged a glance. "Mr. Montgomery, we need you to come with us to the station for questioning," the senior officer said. "You have the right to remain silent." As they led my husband away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with tear-filled eyes. "Leona, please. You know I'd never really hurt you." I met his gaze steadily. "Actually, Corey, I don't know that at all, but I do know one thing: I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow, right after I land the Kelwin account." "After all I've done for you," he cried, suddenly indignant. "I gave you the Montgomery name, and I gave you 5 years of my life." I replied calmly. "I think I got the worse end of that deal." The officer gently guided Corey towards the door as he continued to protest, his voice rising to a pathetic whine. "Dad, tell her she's being unreasonable." Reginald remained seated, staring at his hands. "Officers," I said as they prepared to leave, "I believe Mr. Montgomery Sr. might have some valuable information about this situation as well. He seems quite familiar with the plan." Reginald's head snapped up. "Now see here." "Of course, ma'am," the officer replied. "We'll be taking statements from everyone involved." After they left with Corey, I turned to Reginald. "I hope you have a good lawyer. You're going to need one." "Are you threatening me?" he demanded, some of his bluster returning. "Not at all, just offering sound financial advice." I smiled thinly. "That's what I do, after all." I spent the night at the hospital undergoing toxicology tests while police officers stood guard outside my door. The doctors confirmed what Estella had inadvertently revealed: the tea contained a prescription sedative that, at the dosage found, could cause severe cognitive impairment and memory loss. "We're checking your blood for evidence of previous exposure," the doctor explained. "The residue can remain in hair follicles for weeks, so we'll be testing those as well." I nodded, oddly calm despite everything. Perhaps it was knowing the truth after weeks of unexplained fatigue, memory lapses, and concentration issues. The symptoms I'd attributed to overwork had been deliberately inflicted by the person who was supposed to love me most. "Will there be lasting effects?" I asked. "From what we can tell, the doses were relatively small until today," she replied. "You might have experienced some temporary cognitive issues, but there shouldn't be permanent damage." "And my sister-in-law, she received a much higher dose than what you've been exposed to previously, but she is stable. She'll be monitored overnight." I nodded, feeling strangely detached. "Good. You don't seem as shocked as most people would be," the doctor observed. "I think I've suspected something was wrong for weeks," I admitted. "I just didn't want to believe my husband could do something like this." "Most don't," she said sympathetically. "Will you be safe going home?" "He's been arrested," I replied, "and I'll be changing the locks first thing tomorrow." "Good plan," she patted my shoulder. "Get some rest. The officers want to take a full statement in the morning." But rest wouldn't come. I spent the night reviewing my presentation for Kelwin Industries, focusing on the numbers and projections to avoid thinking about the fact that my husband had been systematically poisoning me to sabotage my career. The following morning, I walked into Mercer and Stone's conference room with a clarity and focus that felt almost supernatural. The irony wasn't lost on me. The attempt to sabotage my performance had only stripped away all distractions. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" my boss had asked when I called him with a brief explanation of why I'd be arriving directly from the hospital where I'd spent the night undergoing toxicology tests. "We could reschedule with Kelwin's." "Absolutely not," I'd replied. "I've prepared too long for this. Besides, what better proof of my commitment and resilience?" The Kelwin executives were suitably impressed by both my presentation and the abbreviated version of why I'd come straight from giving police statements. By noon, we had signed the largest client contract in the firm's history, and I had secured not just a partnership, but a corner office with a view of the harbor. "I don't know how you did it," my colleague Marcus whispered as we left the conference room. "If my spouse tried to poison me, I'd be a wreck." "The best revenge is success," I replied with a grim smile, and nothing was going to keep me from this client. The toxicology reports came back 3 days later, confirming what Estella had inadvertently admitted. The tea contained a potent prescription sedative that, combined with certain foods, could cause severe cognitive impairment, memory loss, and in higher doses, respiratory depression. Further tests on my hair sample showed traces of the same substance going back approximately 6 weeks. Both Corey and Estella were charged with multiple felony counts. The prosecution's case was strengthened when a search of Corey's office uncovered a stash of pills matching those found in the tea and a journal meticulously documenting the effects of various doses on my behavior. Seemed groggy in meeting with Johnson client, forgot presentation points. Success. One entry read, "Another noted slept through alarm for quarterly review. Received first negative feedback from boss. Need to increase dosage before Kelwin pitch." The most damning entry was from the previous night. "Double dose for tomorrow's tea. Should ensure complete failure with Kelwin when she loses partnership track. Will finally see that my business is the future. Dad will be pleased." The journal revealed a man not just weak but actively vindictive, someone who took satisfaction in my failures and meticulously engineered them rather than celebrating my successes. Each page showed Corey's handwriting becoming more unhinged, more desperate, as his own business floundered while mine flourished. He kept score, I told my attorney, still stunned by the depth of the betrayal, like it was a competition rather than a marriage. "Unfortunately, this isn't as uncommon as you'd think," she replied, "though the method is certainly creative." The trial was mercifully quick, given the overwhelming evidence. What was less merciful was sitting through Corey's testimony, watching him transform from the man I married into a sniveling, finger-pointing wreck who blamed everyone but himself, Estella, for suggesting it, his father for pressuring him to succeed, and even me for making him feel inadequate by excelling in my career. "Mr. Montgomery," the prosecutor asked during cross-examination, "isn't it true that while you were systematically poisoning your wife to derail her career, your own investment business was failing?" "It wasn't failing," Corey insisted. "I was in negotiations for several major deals. Yet financial records show you hadn't secured a significant client in over 18 months. Meanwhile, your wife was on track to become the youngest partner at Mercer & Stone." "She was making me look bad," Corey blurted, then immediately tried to backtrack. "I didn't mean to." "Your Honor," the prosecutor said calmly, "I believe Mr. Montgomery has just clarified his motive." Estella's defense was equally pathetic. She claimed she was just trying to help her brother save face in their family, that the sedative was practically harmless, and that I was exaggerating the effects for attention. "Mrs. Pierce," the prosecutor asked, "if the substance was harmless, why were you hospitalized after consuming it?" "I had an unusual reaction," she insisted. "Most people would just feel relaxed." "And you know this, how—" "My brother told me," she admitted, then winced as she realized her mistake. "So you administered a substance to Mrs. Montgomery based solely on your brother's assurance that it was safe, despite having no medical training yourself?" "Well, when you put it that way, son." The jury was unimpressed. Both siblings were convicted on all counts, with Corey receiving a 7-year sentence and Estella 5 years. Reginald Montgomery, though not legally culpable, was morally bankrupt in the eyes of Boston society. He sold his home and moved to Florida within a month of the verdict. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my corner office, watching sailboats cut through the harbor as I sipped from a mug of coffee I'd prepared myself. The firm had thrived under the Kelwin account, expanding our client base and opening 2 new offices. I now headed our largest division with a team of 30 under my direction and a compensation package that made my previous salary look like pocket change. The divorce had been finalized within 6 months, with Corey receiving nothing from our assets given the circumstances. I'd sold our house, too many bitter memories lingered in that kitchen, and purchased a sleek downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and not a single piece of furniture from my previous life. May Richardson, my assistant's voice came through the intercom. I'd reverted to my maiden name the day after Corey's arrest. Your 4 o'clock is here. Send them in, I replied, arranging the presentation materials on my conference table. My phone buzzed with a text from my date for the evening, a charming architect I'd met through a colleague, who found my vengeful takedown of the toxic Montgomery clan, as he called it, both impressive and strangely romantic. Life had a peculiar way of working out. I hadn't asked for betrayal, but I had certainly made the most of its aftermath. My assistant knocked lightly before entering with a stack of contracts. These need your signature before 5, she said. Oh, and this came for you. She handed me a letter with a prison postmark. Corey's handwriting. Do you want me to throw it away? She asked, knowing the whole sordid story. I considered it for a moment. No, I decided. Leave it. After she left, I turned the envelope over in my hands. Whatever desperate explanation or apology it contained wouldn't change anything. The time for explanations had passed with the dregs of that bitter tea. I dropped the unopened letter into the shredder and returned to the contracts. Some brews are simply too poisonous to taste twice. Outside my window, the harbor stretched blue and limitless. I'd always been taught that revenge was the dish best served cold. But I'd discovered something better, success served piping hot, steeped in the knowledge that the people who tried to dim your light are sitting in darkness of their own making. The investigation into my poisoning had uncovered other victims as well, 2 of Corey's ex-girlfriends who had experienced similar symptoms during their relationships. They'd both assumed it was stress or overwork, never suspecting their boyfriend was drugging them to maintain his perceived superiority. You should feel proud, my therapist had told me during one of our sessions. Your actions potentially saved other women from the same fate. I didn't feel proud, exactly, but I did feel vindicated and stronger than I'd ever been. My intercom buzzed again. The Kelwin team is on line 1 about the new marketing initiative. Put them through, I replied, picking up the phone with a smile. Julian, how are you? Yes, I've reviewed the projections. Let's discuss the next steps. As I guided the conversation with confidence and clarity, I couldn't help but think about how different today might have been if I hadn't noticed something off about my tea that Sunday morning, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't switched those cups. Sometimes the smallest actions determine our fate. A cup of tea, a moment of suspicion, a simple switch. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to myself. Here's to switching cups when necessary, and knowing when to walk away from a bitter brew.